was, both of them drank until they would pass out every night. But my mom drank a lot more than my grandmother did. So I knew if she called me after a certain
Here's Leigh Ann's story.
Well, I am Leigh Ann Woznica. I am a brain health coach and Alzheimer's prevention expert. And I got to this place because of a lot of a lot of Alzheimer's in my family. So to start, we'll just go way, way back to what got me on the journey. So when I was growing up, I'm from the South, and everything was fried, and everything was, you know, I can remember being a little kid and going to my grandmother's house, and I grew up in a traditional Southern family. You say one thing out of one side of your mouth, and you really mean something out of the other side of your mouth. And so my grandmother would, we'd go to her house every Sunday for Sunday lunch, and she would tell me, get seconds, here's seconds, have more, eat more, eat more. And then as I started to get fat, because I ended up being a pretty fat kid by the time I was about 10, um, she would tell me that I'm fat, but she just kept feeding me, right? Like, and then tell me I needed to lose weight. So I had a really unhealthy relationship with food. My mom wasn't around a lot, and she and my dad divorced when I was young, and he wasn't around at all. And so food became a babysitter for me because she would be gone at night working a second job, and I would just have food in the house. And so I would eat a lot and sit in front of the television. And so that became my life. And when I got in, so while I was in elementary school, it wasn't that big of a deal. But when I got to junior high school and boys started to become an interest, and I started seeing what really skinny, pretty girls looked like, I wanted that really bad. And I remember in 7th grade, I decided I wanted to lose weight really fast. And so I allowed myself a Snickers bar and a Dr. Pepper, and that was all the food I would eat all day long. And I lost a bunch of weight doing it. And so I started thinking, okay, this is a great way to lose weight. You just limit what you take in. It doesn't matter. I didn't know anything about nutrition back then, and this was in the 80s. And fast forward into my later teens, I started to understand a little better. Like, I needed to put vegetables in my body. My mom had started seeing my stepdad, the man who would become my stepdad, and she again wasn't around very often. My mother never wanted kids. She had kids because my dad wanted kids, and so she wasn't much of a mother, if I can say that, which is going to be a really big piece of the coming story. So she wasn't around. So I started cooking for myself. I remember the first thing I ever cooked for myself was baked pork chops, and they were really good. And I was like, oh, I can cook. And I learned how to fry chicken, and I could fry chicken better than anybody in my family, which kind of led me to believe that I had a natural instinct in the kitchen. And then I started learning how to bake, and that will become part of my story too. And then in my early 20s, well, in my late teens, I got pregnant with my daughter, and that became my reason to eat anything. I gained 70 pounds with that pregnancy, and I ate barbecued Fritos and Butterfinger candy bars and drank as much whole milk as I could get my hands on, and I just ballooned up. Um, so again, it just goes to show that I have a very unhealthy relationship with food. Well, through all of that, also, I was drinking alcoholically. I started drinking alcoholically at the age of 12. And that is also a huge part of my story, because um, what I realized in my late 20s was I have a very addictive personality. Like, I just see something I like, and or something feels good. If I get that dopamine effect from it, I want more and more and more and more and more. And when I was 30, I got sober, and I started going to Food Addicts Anonymous, which was really stringent. That was where I started my recovery. And then I went to Overeaters Anonymous, which was a little more lenient. And the interesting piece was people who were in Food Addicts Anonymous tended to have a lot more success with their what they called abstinence from sugar and carbs, because it was so stringent. And people who went to Overeaters Anonymous tended to relapse consistently. Like, you very rarely saw good weight loss in Overeaters Anonymous. But that was really what it was all about, was just the weight loss. And so I ended up going to AA. I was familiar with AA. And when I found out I couldn't drink while I was in Overeaters Anonymous, that was just a huge trigger for me that made me realize I probably needed help with alcohol more than anything. Cause at that time, I believed that alcohol was much worse for me than food. And so I went to AA, and I've been in AA ever since. When I moved to Alaska in the 5 months after I got sober, which was probably the best move I could have made, because my mother, and this is kind of going back to the lack of support, when I stopped drinking, my mother said to me, are you going to have to do this for the rest of your life? And I'd probably been sober a couple of months, and I was like, well, yeah, probably. That's the intent, is for me to not drink again. And she said, oh, well, that's terrible. I miss the party girl, because I had been drinking with my mom since I was 13. Like, we just had a really toxic relationship. And that led me to believe that, I needed to get away from North Carolina. Like, all of my relationships in North Carolina were just toxic, and I needed to get out, and I had a way to get out. So I moved to Alaska. And uh, when I got up here, I started going to AA up here, and I met some incredible women who were healthy. Like, they believed in nutrition, they believed in outdoor activities, they were athletes, and really understood a lot more about nutrition. And this one friend, who was a trained chef, had this book from this lady. Her name is Dee McCaffrey, and she was an organic chemist, and she had written this book on um, proper diet, proper nutrition, and how to eat whole foods. And that was the start of my journey. And that would have been 2006, probably. And then in 2007, I had my blood work done for the first time. And I found out that I was intolerant to almost everything on the planet except meat, which I thought was really interesting, but kind of bounced around. So I believe what I've learned is yo-yo dieting is really dangerous for our metabolic reaction. So metabolic syndrome happens a lot when we yo-yo diet. And I had been doing that my entire life. And I still probably did plenty of it even after I started learning about nutrition. But in 2012, I left Alaska and moved back to the lower 48. And I ended up in California, and I started going to a holistic nutrition school, which was, a lot of veggies. They still believed in meat, but it was a lot of veggies. And I started cooking a lot differently, and I had lost so much weight just having gotten sober. My mom retired a few months after my grandmother died, and she always was a really, really heavy drinker. I mean, way worse than I ever was. Both of them drank until they would pass out every night. But my mom drank a lot more than my grandmother did. So I knew if she called me after a certain time of day not to answer the phone, because she was drunk. And when she retired, she began drinking all day. So I'm tying in the alcoholism because it's very hereditary in my family. So this was in 2017, and her behavior had started to become pretty erratic, but I thought it was just because she was drinking so much. 2018 rolled around, and I started to get the conversations, even in the middle of the day, that I was having with her were really strange. She would tell me, just like, she would talk about having to lock her door, and she would describe to me what locking her door looked like. The details that she was putting into a conversation didn't make sense to me. I was like, why is she sharing these weird little details? But at the time, I didn't know anything about Alzheimer's. So I never researched it when my grandmother had it, because why would I? I mean, my grandmother had it, and I had no idea about hereditary. So the conversations with her were starting to become really, really weird. And I thought she was just drinking all the time. Well, October of 2018, it had gotten to the point where I was starting to get concerned. She was wrecking her car a lot and blaming other people for it. And I couldn't make heads or tails of conversations that we were having. So I called her friend and said, hey, I just think that there's something going on with her. and I need to come in and take her to the doctor. And he was like, oh, no, 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 I'll take care of it. I'll get her into the doctor and we'll see what's going on. And so he gets her into the doctor and her blood sugar was over 800. And if you're at all familiar with blood sugar, if you're listening to this podcast, anything over 130 is not good. And she was walking dead, basically. Her blood sugar was over 800. She had no idea she had a daughter. Her friend told the doctor, here's her daughter's information. And she looked at him and said, what are you talking about? I don't have a daughter. Her dementia had progressed to a point that it was, unless she was talking to me on the phone, she had no idea I existed. But she would have that moment of clarity when we were on the phone and remember who I was. So she went through neurology. They pulled that brain scan that they had done the day she fell in 2017. They pulled that brain scan and they looked at it. And that's how they diagnosed her. So she had had full-blown Alzheimer's for years before she was diagnosed. And so if you go back to the beginning of my story, my mother and I had a very toxic relationship. We did not get along. We did not have, I did not have the feelings for her that most daughters probably carry for their mothers. Like Sherry, you shared that you were really close with your mom. She was your best friend. Didn't have that. Could have cared less if she lived or died, to be honest with everybody. I mean, if you really want to hear the story, I have a book about it. But God stepped in. Tyler and I have a very good relationship with God, and I had gone through ebbs and flows in my faith for years and years and years. But we had brought God into the center of our relationship early on in our relationship, and he stepped in. And as soon as I got that phone call that she had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, I looked at Tyler and said, I think we need to bring her here and take care of her, because I'm an only child and her whole family was already dead, both her parents and her brother. And so I don't know why I'm crying. And so we moved her from North Carolina to Colorado, which is where we were at the time, and we brought her into our home. Well, I dove into research and found out that the ketogenic diet was the best diet for Alzheimer's, that we needed to get her levels checked for all vitamins. And Dr. Dale Bredesen wrote a book called The End of Alzheimer's, which was the first book I ever read. And he talked a lot in there about genetics, and he talked about supplements, and he had a protocol that he had in place. And so I ordered his kit. We did the cognitive decline test. We took her to a neurologist in Colorado. Like, we just did all the things. Strict ketogenic. We got her exercising, and we reversed her diabetes. Her blood sugar was back to normal. Got her off all her diabetic medications, got her off cholesterol meds, which I would never advocate for anyway. And we stalled the progression of her Alzheimer's. She was still taking her own blood sugar every day. Every once in a while, she'd have moments where she'd forget how to do it. And so I saw what that protocol could do. I didn't follow it completely because sometimes I struggle with other people pushing their supplements. But what happened was I started looking at Daniel Amen, who is a brain health clinic psychologist, and he was one of the founding people who started using a SPECT scan, which was a 3D imaging scan. And Tyler and I both took his class, or took his brain health coaching course, and became brain health coaches, and started understanding a lot more about brain damage and what that looks like. And then when we moved back up here to Alaska in 21, I quit a 20-year career to start building a business around brain health coaching. But in the process of doing that, because I'm such an advocate for keto and carnivore eating, I took a keto and carnivore nutrition coaching certification course too, and ended up becoming a weight loss coach, which wasn't what I wanted to do. So I'm circling back to being a brain health coach. But when COVID hit, we were not able to take my mom out. And socialization is one of the biggest components for Alzheimer's prevention, because if we're not communicating with other people, isolation can be really, really dangerous. And my mom was always an isolator. So we would get her out and go bowling and do all these fun things. And she just, and we talked to her all day. And so she just was thriving. She was absolutely thriving. And then COVID hit and we had to stay in, and she sat in front of the television and declined. And there wasn't anything. I mean, there were probably things we could have done, but because we couldn't get her out talking to people, she really declined, and she declined to a point that we couldn't help her anymore. Like, I don't know. For me, helping my mother shower, we just didn't have that relationship. I wanted to be there for her. I wanted to help her wherever I could, but helping her shower was a struggle. And the looping that she does in communication. One of the things that I really wanted to point out, though, was the genetics. One of the biggest reasons that I am such an advocate for brain health is, when I was reading the book, there's a genetic variant called the ApoE4 gene. And Tyler and I had done the 23andMe genetic testing years before my mom was diagnosed. And I went and looked at that test result, and I carry both the genetic variants of that particular variant. Having one of them gives you a 30 to 60% greater chance of Alzheimer's. Having two of them gives me a 90% greater chance of developing Alzheimer's. But it's 100% preventable. And I want to be that person who beats those odds, right? I want to be that person who's doing everything possible to beat those odds, because I got to tell you, I feel like Alzheimer's is probably the most undignified way to die. If you're going to die by disease, it's probably the most undignified disease to die from. Having to take diapers to my mother's memory care center on Thursday and drop them off because she has no control of her bladder and bowels anymore. I mean, I'd much rather die knowing my family and knowing that people love me, that are surrounding me. So that's my goal in life, is to help myself, because I am predisposed to this disease more so than many people, and other people in the world who you don't have to have the genetics to get it. It just makes it a stronger possibility to help other people not die from that disease, because the epidemic right now of Alzheimer's is growing at a rate, because the obesity level in our country is growing at a rate, or in the world is growing at a rate that is we're just going to see people lose their minds. And what used to just be known as the occasional episode of senility is now becoming a common factor in our world. And it's the worst disease I've ever seen in my life. And I just don't want to see people die from it if they don't have to. So that's my mission, and that's my story.
And I think the mom part too, and I think it's just a testament of God, because I just think about how I hear people talk about how they don't have, or how they'll never have, or how forgiveness is so hard, because you look at your past, and I mean, what people do to you, or what they say, or how they are, is just stabbing to the core. But I think when we think about, even for me, where I've been in seasons or times in my life that, I just didn't know. I didn't know what the future would hold. I didn't even realize the damage I was doing to myself, or my toxicity even. But I think just hearing, the change in you, and just being able to reflect back and to say, yeah, that's me too, and to see what God does in the change, and to hear answered prayers. And just the season that we're in is not where we're staying. It's not where we have to stay. It's just beautiful.
I think with that too is that God made our bodies so forgiving, also, not just our minds but our bodies.
Yeah.
That we can heal, and just by making some changes, it starts rippling, and and yeah, we can heal. We always have that capability if we choose to take it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a friend message me the other day who's interested in doing the fasting too. I don't think she'll start right now, but she said to me, I forget, I thought this was really profound. She said, I forget that we were created to live forever in the Garden of Eden. Our bodies are designed for that.
That's a really interesting thought, because there's just been so much sickness and disease and things in our air and in our food and in everything, that I wonder how long we really could live if we didn't have all those toxins bombarding us.
Right.
I think this is just the start of so many great things to come. So thank you for listening. Thank you for letting us share our stories. Thank you for letting us pour our hearts out to you. And I would just say, if there's something that touched you when you heard anything, that you share it. There'll be a link, and I want you to just feel the okay to do that. We want to hear, we want to know how we can be a part of your community to support you and pray with you and to share the things that we've learned over the years. And this is not a one size fits all. This is a one size welcomes everybody in all shapes and all sizes. So this is a community where you come as you are. We are 100% here to pray with you, here to grow with you, and here to share with you. So please get on our email list and just sign up so that we can share with you more to come. Because I promise you, there is going to be a lot of good discussion and a lot of good things coming your way. So I wish you all the best, and we will see you soon. Talk later. Bye.
Thank you for joining us and hearing our stories. We hope you connect with one or more of us. If you do, please join us for podcasts about what we do coming up in the next weeks.